Hello, I'm Luke, and welcome to another episode of the Vision to Victory podcast, where we discuss practical ways to turn your dreams into reality. Last week, we talked about the topic of seeing clearly and how we don't want to see things through the lens of our own fear, insecurity, self-centeredness. Whatever the case, we want to make sure that we're seeing things as they are, not through a distorted lens. We talked about pattern recognition and how what can seem chaotic to an untrained eye can easily be broken down into a pattern that is recognizable and easy to explain by someone who's a pro in that area. We used music as an example. Someone might look at a piano and just see a bunch of keys where, Mozart looked at a piano and, saw a symphony, right? And so, pattern recognition, we talked about differentiating feelings from reality. This is a big one. Just because we feel a certain way doesn't mean that is an indication of any type of truth or reality other than that we feel that way. Doesn't mean anything else other than that. And then perhaps the most important piece of seeing clearly, we talked about motivations and how they have such a significant impact on what we see. And, we use the example of a car. If you're looking to purchase a car, you're looking online, and then you start seeing that car everywhere. That doesn't mean that a bunch of people just went out and bought that car. Of course, it means that the motivation that you have is causing you to be more aware or to see those things. So it's really easy, again, to confuse the motivation that's driving our perception with the actual reality. The reality is that the same people more than likely have been driving those same cars and you're just noticing them. So again, we just really, when we talk about seeing clearly, we want to make sure that our lens is clear, so to speak, and that we're not mistaking any of these things, feelings or motivations for the actual truth or reality. So the next step from seeing clearly is intellectual courage. And that's what I want to talk about today. And as I was digging into this, I realized there's a lot here. And so I actually want to do this over the next 2 weeks. So this week and next week. And this week, I want to talk specifically about some reasoning fallacies and how there's so many errors in how many of us process or even substantiate our own beliefs. And we could believe things that maybe we haven't thought through in a way that's actually going to get us to the truth. And so what I've realized as I was digging into this is that we really need to lay a groundwork for this. And then next week, we'll talk about what I initially set out to talk about when considering the topic of intellectual courage, which is really, what does it look like to get into kind of deep water, so to speak, on complex but very important and meaningful issues or things in our own life and really what we believe, and just what I would say is kind of the meat and potatoes of not only this topic, but I would say much of life, which requires us to brave the uncertainty intellectually. So in our minds, so much of how we experience life is through our minds, of course, and how we take in information, how we process it. And so to really hone the skill of intellectual courage, which I believe it is a skill and something that we can learn and develop, we need to be willing to jump into those kind of deep waters, so to speak. So all that to say, today we're going to lay a groundwork. I think this is will be super helpful for a lot of people. It might make me laugh as I was going through this. these are, we're going to talk through some reasoning and kind of logical fallacies that if you watch or listen to social media, or regular media or anything like that, or you're in a relationship with a significant other, I promise you've seen all of these. And so this can be a little humorous, but I hope you can truly take away, from this, how to better process information and to hopefully, from my perspective, I want us to not be lazy in how we think about things or process them, and to not just kind of take surface level bits and pieces and try to form beliefs or, any type of life strategy based off something that we haven't actually scrutinized thoroughly, or there's not a lot of thought behind how we arrived there. So without further ado, let's talk through some of these fallacies. I'll give one more comment. If you ever taken a debate class in school, you maybe learn these, which I think is a wonderful thing. And I think I wish everybody, would take a debate class, not so that you learn how to argue, but so that you learn how to reason well. So anyway, here we go. Reasoning and logical fallacies. So ad hominem. This is the fallacy of attacking the person making the argument instead of addressing the argument itself. This is so common in culture today. We could, reference cancel culture, or certainly anything in politics. It's just, let's not scrutinize the merit of maybe what is being said or what's being done, and build a case for that. Let's just attack the person. And kind of aside there is, if you are choosing to attack the person instead of the argument, it often means that maybe there's weight to their argument, or again, just back to being lazy, it maybe just seems easier. Let me just attack this person so I don't have to actually do any work to, address the actual argument being placed in front of me. So again, ad hominem fallacy, attacking the person instead of the argument. The straw man fallacy, this is the next one. The straw man fallacy is misrepresenting or distorting an opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. So again, this is all kind of in debate language, so to speak, but this is a funny one to me because this is something you'll run into in relationships, certainly. So maybe if you're in an argument with your spouse, and we can very easily take something that someone says and maybe twist it just a little bit, take bits and pieces, manipulate it just a little bit, to make it something else. And then we attack that instead of attacking the actual, argument or what the person actually said, which again is either because it holds too much weight and anything we would say wouldn't stand up to that argument, or again, just being lazy. Let me just pick this apart and make it into something silly that's easy to attack or dismantle. So again, ad hominem, attacking the person instead of the argument. Straw man, misrepresenting or distorting someone's arguments to make it easier to attack. And then this next one, man, this happens all the time. Hasty generalization fallacy, or I would just call this generalization or over generalization. So this is drawing a conclusion from a small or unrepresentative sample. I mean, how many times have you seen this? I saw this clip on social media. It must mean blah, blah, blah. Or, maybe I saw 12 clips on social media, and we'll get to another fallacy there. But just because you or me or anybody, just because you see something, hear something, read something that validates maybe a feeling that you have, that does not substantiate it as a valid argument in any way, shape, or form. So let's say you have a belief or a thought or an opinion, and because of something you feel strongly about, maybe you had some personal experience and you feel strongly about it, and then you see a video clip and it validates that feeling. That doesn't mean that any of that is representative of reality. Again, feeling's not reality. We learned that last week. And just because somebody says something that connects with you on some sort of feeling level doesn't mean that anything that they say after that is accurate. So that's the generalization fallacy, drawing a conclusion from little or insufficient evidence or sample size. False dilemma fallacy. This is the next one here. This one also makes me chuckle. I've got a couple people in my life who like to do this. So this is presenting only two options when more are available. Sometimes this makes me chuckle because oftentimes when this happens, it's so apparent that there's many more conclusions that could be drawn from whatever the situation is or whatever is being discussed. And anytime someone says, well, it's either this or that, and my initial gut reaction is, nope, let me list these, 3 or 4 other possible things that could be concluded from that. What's interesting too is usually when someone's using this false dilemma fallacy, they, on one end of the spectrum, present the option that is so ridiculous and it couldn't possibly be that. And then whatever thing they are thinking or concluding, which usually, again, simply lines up with their feelings or predisposition and is not actually the most likely conclusion if the facts were actually looked at objectively. Does that make sense? You've got let me just throw out this outlandish one on the left here. And then over here on the other side, we've got what is my conclusion. And so obviously this is right because I'm presenting it against this ridiculous notion over here when the reality is there's a lot of other options and several of them are much more likely than the conclusion you're presenting. So again, false dilemma fallacy, presenting only two options when more are available. The next one, the slippery slope fallacy, I actually would call this catastrophizing. And this is claiming that one action will lead to a series of increasingly extreme consequences. There are so many examples of this. There's so many examples. I can think of several, certainly culturally, even politically, but there's definitely some relationally as well, where this might look something like maybe you have a disagreement with your spouse or significant other, and you say, see, you said this. Now the rest of the day is ruined. And then it's going to bleed into our weekend and all that. And one does not equal the other, or it certainly doesn't have to. And that's actually, I would say, a lighter but very common example. But the same is true in, again, media, politics, all that. And in fact, anytime you hear something, social media, traditional media, whatever it is, and the presenter is doing this, they're catastrophizing, trying to say that, this terrible thing's about to happen if we don't do this. You should have warning lights going on in your head and saying, this is probably BS on some level, probably not accurate on some level, or they're trying to, get me to align with their, belief or position, I would say is a better way to put it. So they're using fear to manipulate. And so again, slippery slope fallacy, claiming that one action will lead to a series of extreme consequences, generally just not true. So the next one, again, this is extremely common, and I think we have all done this at some point in our lives. And this is the appeal to emotion. using emotions to persuade instead of logic or evidence. So if I can maybe tell a story to elicit a feeling out of you and use that as a case for my position, while there might be some other value in there somewhere, and that's certainly not to diminish the value of storytelling, which I am a huge fan of, but using emotions to persuade or manipulate in place of actually substantiating your claim or position is insufficient. Emotions do not equal reason. And again, as we discussed last week, emotions are not the same as reality. They're certainly not the same as fact. And so if you are trying to develop a belief or form a position on something, emotions are not a sufficient way to do that. You need actual concrete kind of whether logic or evidence, something other than just a feeling. Another one kind of closely related to that would be an appeal to authority. Again, this is one we see a lot, which is relying on an unqualified authority to support a claim. Well, so-and-so said, well, so-and-so doesn't know what they're talking about, and or I don't know so-and-so. So that's not a valid justification for much of anything. And so that's not to diminish, true authority figures. And again, I'm not talking about authority in the sense of a hierarchy, like someone at the top of the hierarchy has authority over someone below them. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is someone who has a very substantiated track record. And here's a big piece on this. It's just because you're smart doesn't mean that you're not pushing an agenda. And so this goes back to kind of motivations and all the things that play into, how people form opinions. And then again, if someone's trying to state a position on something, this gets used often as, well, so-and-so went to such and such school and did such and such. So whatever they're saying must be true. While those facts might be true that they went to that school and they did this thing over here, that doesn't mean that their motivations are, objective or are truth seeking. Maybe I'll just use a random example. Maybe it's a medical professional, quote, professional who has a vested interest in a drug that might be prescribed. Obviously, if that is the case, then even though they're an authority in the arena, anything that they say is likely to be skewed because of what else they have. Maybe they are going to make money if this drug is prescribed. And so just because somebody has a title, has a background, does not make them an objective authority, and certainly doesn't make them, put them in a position to weigh in or to be used as substantiating evidence for something. Again, that's not to say, by the way, that there aren't very qualified experts in certain fields who have expert objective opinions, and those are used maybe in court cases, all sorts of things. So not to say that those aren't, that there's not situations where you can reference someone who's an expert in that area, but not being an expert in an area by itself is simply not sufficient. Like if you've got an underlying motivation that would cause you to be dishonest or manipulate or again use facts and distort them, twist them to fit some sort of narrative, then just because you might be smart and liked even doesn't mean that your position is true or accurate. So again, appeal to emotion, using emotions to persuade instead of logic. Appeal to authority, relying on an unqualified or unsubstantiated or unobjective source to support a claim. And then the last one here is the bandwagon fallacy. And again, this is another one that's got a little humor tied to it because we see it all the time. This is claiming something is true because it's popular. Wow. I mean, there are so many things that are popular that are not true. Look, I mean, I don't even think that we need to go down a bunch of examples because I think we could all probably think of several. Yeah, just because many people believe it doesn't make it accurate or true at all. In fact, oftentimes people will just get on a bandwagon to be a part of the crew and not have really any understanding of what it is that they're supporting, but they just want, connection or, camaraderie. And the way to get that sometimes can be to just join a group or some people who have a similar position on something. And that's just one way to meet some human need instead of actually for the purpose of, again, seeking truth. So bandwagon fallacy, claiming something's true because it's popular. I can't tell you, I've been in many, many conversations where someone has, said to me, well, so-and-so over here said it. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, that doesn't mean anything. That does, just because somebody else agrees with you doesn't mean that I agree with you. And even if I did, that still wouldn't be enough of a reason unless that's a mutual person that we agree is objective and an expert in kind of all those things. So there's a lot here, and I could spend a lot of time just unpacking each of these. But I think you get the point, hopefully, which is that we just want to think and reason clearly. And just because something triggers an emotion in us does not make it true. Just because something, corroborates or validates a belief or feeling that we have also doesn't make it true. So I just want to read back through these fallacies. Hopefully these will stick with you. I'll give a couple closing thoughts after that. Ad hominem, attacking the person making the argument instead of addressing the argument. Straw man fallacy, misrepresenting or distorting an opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. Hasty generalization fallacy, drawing a conclusion from a small or unrepresentative sample. False dilemma fallacy, presenting only two options when more are available. The slippery slope fallacy, or catastrophizing, claiming that one action will lead to a series of increasingly extreme consequences. Appeal to emotion, using emotions to persuade instead of logic or evidence. And then appeal to authority, relying on an unqualified or unobjective authority to support a claim. And then finally, the bandwagon fallacy, claiming something is true because it's popular. So again, if you find yourself trying to pick and choose facts and maybe distort or manipulate a situation or event to fit your narrative, perhaps you should reconsider your narrative. Now, admittedly, this can be very difficult to do, to look in the mirror, so to speak, and to say, okay, I'm probably trying to manipulate this a little bit to, make my point, even though I know that what I'm, using to substantiate my point isn't exactly accurate. And maybe I'm twisting what they said a little bit, but my point still stands because I feel strongly about it. It can be difficult to admit that to ourselves and then certainly to another person, but hopefully we want to be the kind of people that don't mind something that can be uncomfortable if it's healthy and makes us better people. So look, again, if you find yourself trying to pick and choose facts, distort a situation or event to fit your narrative, maybe reconsider your narrative. And then look, this could be in a relationship and even with ourselves and our own beliefs. This is important, we often will choose confident ignorance over uncertain reality. We often will choose confident ignorance over uncertain reality. Meaning, again, we like to just collect enough little data points, even if they all fall under these fallacy categories, and we know that they're not able to substantiate our belief, but we just collect enough so that we can feel really confident about our position, even though our position is still completely ignorant, because all the little things that we collected along the way to substantiate it were not valid in the first place. And hopefully, again, in the vein of intellectual courage, we have the courage to brave uncertain reality. Okay, what if I actually scrutinize and put under a microscope what I believe and what I'm holding so tightly to? And what if the situation is much more complex and I have to reconcile that it's not as simple as I thought it was. It's not as cut and dry. It's not as black and white. It's not as whatever. And what if that leaves me with more questions than answers? Wouldn't you rather go down that path than stay confident and ignorant in something that's not true or not accurate? I would. This reminds me of a movie, The Big Short, which is a fun and very enjoyable movie, by the way. I highly recommend it. But it's about the 2008 housing crisis in the United States. And there's a term in there that they use called a CDO. This is a financial term, and it's collateralized debt obligation. And what happened in 2008 and leading up to that, the housing market crash, is there were high risk mortgages. So people that are likely to default on mortgages, which we could, there's a whole other story of how that happened, where there was a lot of high risk mortgages. And what banks or financial institutions would do is take all those high risk mortgages, bundle them up in what's called a security, or in this case, a CDO, and then they would use that as an investment. What's crazy about this is those very high risk mortgages were lumped together and then packaged to investors as low risk, even though they were almost certain there's almost certainly going to be defaults, and they were in fact very high risk. And just because you put a bunch of bad stuff together doesn't make it good. I thought this was a good illustration of what often happens with us as we, build beliefs or opinions about something. We just collect all these little data points, again, whether that's via social media or just bits and pieces, and throw it all together and say, look, here's my belief, here's my opinion. But if you really were to dig in to each little piece of that and scrutinize it, you realize, oh, wow, this piece over here, that's crap. This piece over here, well, that's just emotional, that's not actually real. Or this piece over here is just trying to discredit somebody, even though what they're saying is accurate. You get what I'm saying, right? It's like, just because you get a bunch of little data points and throw it all together and then kind of package that under a belief or a thought that you have, that doesn't make it any more valid, if you will. And so again, I hope that everyone takes this and maybe is willing to put their own beliefs and ideas under more scrutiny, particularly if you find yourself feeling strongly about it. For me, at this stage of my life, if I feel strongly about something, then I almost feel a responsibility or an obligation to learn more about it. And in the interest of my own time and energy, I don't do this I hold my beliefs lightly. There's some notable exceptions to that, whether that's faith or some principles and values that I live by. But outside of that, I try to hold my opinions lightly, because I just recognize I don't have all the information, and it would require a significant amount of time and energy to actually get the information to really formulate a belief or formulate a position on something. And so if I'm going to actually do that, like formulate a well-established position, because I think it's, an important, topic or something that's really relevant to my life, then I will do the work. I will, as best as I can and as objectively as I can, I want to scrutinize, all the things leading up to where I stand on this particular, again, issue, belief, whatever it is. So I hope you want to do the same. I hope we want to be people who, again, like we talked about last week, see clearly, can look at a situation or a relationship dynamic or any number of things and see it for what it is, not through a skewed lens of motivations and emotions. And then we want to be people who can reason well, who can come to conclusions based on truth and fact, and can easily spot when someone or something is trying to manipulate us using any of these other fallacies that we talked about. We don't want to be that easily swayed. We want to be able to think for ourselves and, again, have intellectual courage. I hope this was helpful. Please tune in next week. I'm looking forward to getting into, again, kind of the meat and potatoes of intellectual courage and really what it looks like to dive into kind of meaningful things in life and to be willing to challenge the status quo on kind of beliefs and even, again, just tying back to our identity, as I always like to. We want to be the type of people that are willing to brave the uncertain, really in every area of life, but certainly in our minds and the beliefs, because those shape our lives perhaps more than we could even realize. So if this was helpful, please like, share, subscribe, and I'll talk to you next week.